Right. Basically, I've no idea how it came to be involved. It just sort of grew. I was born and brought up in Lichfield, in Staffordshire, which is only 15 miles from Birmingham. But in those days, it was a long way away. It was a very small community, Lichfield. I went to the local grammar school there, and obviously knew a lot of the kids around my own age group. And I was pretty much into blues, basically. I was a Chuck Berry fan, the R&B, which was proper R&B then, not what's called R&B these days. Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, that sort of thing. And from him, I sort of got interested in the old blues guys, Muddy Waters, and started getting more and more of their records, playing more of that sort of stuff. And I got to know a trio. Well, it was a four-piece band at the time, although when I got to know them a little bit better, they were a trio in Lichfield called the Levy Set, which is a very trendy name in those days. They were a nice little blues band. They played a lot of Elmore James stuff, which appealed to me. Pretty good drum and bass player for those days, and certainly in my estimation, because I can't play a note. And a rather spectacular guitarist, come organist, come pianist called Jeremy Spencer. We thought they were pretty special, so I attempted to get them some work with varying degrees of lack of success. But we did gig for a couple of years around the Lichfield and Stafford areas, played places like the place at Stoke, and one or two colleges were particularly good for us. One of the other guys that was really into the band, a chap called Phil Smith, decided that he would get in touch with Mike Vernon, who at that time was thinking of launching a new record label, which became Blue Horizon. The actual chronology of this may be a little bit dicey, but by coincidence, I think, it turned out that Mike Vernon was due to be in the Midlands looking at other bands around February of 67, 68. Not sure, I can check that for you. I've got the letter. And we hastily, because we hadn't got a gig around that time, my parents kept a pub in a little village just outside Lichfield, and we co-opted the village hall, set the band up in there, and Mike Vernon, this big shot from London, arrived at Wall Women's Institute Hall to listen to the Levy Set. He seemed to be impressed, but had got other things to do, so off he went. Apparently on that trip he also found Chicken Shack, which I didn't realise till later. And then next we heard from him was a call saying that John Mayall and the Blues Breakers were playing at a club in Birmingham called the Metro, which, as you know, is a little club underneath the arches at Snow Hill Station. Was not so little, actually. It was quite a decent place. Well, that was pretty exciting, as you can imagine. So we got to the Metro on the appointed night. We're asked to play just a couple of numbers in the interval. Mayall obviously didn't know anything about us. In fact, I'm not entirely sure that any of the other members of the band did either. But after a couple of numbers, when Jerry was playing slide guitar, Peter Green was so impressed that he actually got on stage and jammed with Jerry on harmonica. And then they went off into a huddle, leaving me and the rest of the band in a corner, and that was the end of the Levy Set, as I remember it.
Right. So it sounds like you were involved in the Levy Set, and that's what started you moving in the scene
Yes, we'd. I suppose that that was the first contact with the sort of wider area of music. The bands that you actually knew about. I mean, the male band with Peter Green. Obviously, I'd been a fan of males with Clapton and so forth for years. Peter Green was a terrific substitute, and just to be in the same room, let alone on the same stage, was just amazing in those days. But we were able to sort of watch the formation of Fleetwood Mac from that. The first time they played, I mean, Jerry just then didn't play for us again. Obviously, he was transferred immediately, free transfer. But the band then was pretty well complete. They got Peter Green, John McVie on bass. I beg your pardon, Bob Brunning on bass, Mick Fleetwood on drums. So to hear them in the raw stages was terrific. But they just seemed to gel. It was really an eye opener.
Yeah, that's great. Could you start to sort of tell me a little bit about the Birmingham scene of the time as Brumbeat was clash? As I understand it was kind of Brumbeat, blues boom, progressive rock.
Yeah.
Is that? Can you take us through that progression? Perhaps mention. You've already mentioned the Metro there. Perhaps the Golden Eagle, maybe, and moving on to Henry's as well.
You've got to bear in mind that I was in Lichfield.
Yep.
And that was pretty much a separate world. You heard about what was happening in Birmingham, but really the only trips we made were to concerts. We were fairly young kids at that time. Yeah. We did the all-nighters at the town hall, which were amazing events, mainly because you never knew who was going to appear. Went to the Golden Eagle a couple of times. That was mainly to hear Spencer Davis and admire Stevie Winwood in his Triumph Vitesse, which everybody envied. He was about 12 then, I think. Henry's, of course. Mother's was just about to get going there, I should think. But we knew about the Brumbeat side of things, obviously, but really we were a little bit cocooned over in our own little world.
Right. Because
of the difficulties, I suppose you'd call it, of getting to Birmingham. Two friends and I, Phil Smith and Terry Gallagher, decided to open a little blues club of our own. And there had been a previous club running in Lichfield who had Willie Maybell? Can't immediately remember. I'll have to check that for you. They had a blues man, and we thought, well, this is great. You can actually get bluesmen coming to Lichfield. So we got the back room of a pub organised. It eventually ended up in 3 different pubs because we kept getting moved on because of the noise, as you can imagine. And that was our first contact with Jim Simpson. Then he was the local guy for the sort of music that we were interested in, and he did us some amazing deals. I mean, we ran on a Friday night intermittently, and he'd put the bands out to us. If they weren't working, they'd come for ridiculous money, and we got pretty friendly at that stage.
Are you referring to blues bands who perhaps played Henry's on the Thursday and then Lichfield on the Friday? Is that the kind of thing you mean?
It was never that clear cut. If Jim had got anybody in the area, then yes, we'd take them. Some of the bands, we just weren't big enough for. Yeah. Friday night was a popular night, so we took basically who we could get. Sometimes we could only get local bands, but some of the local bands were good. One of them, actually, Clem Clemson played in, who went on to joined Humble Pie, and in fact, did you play with McCartney now? I can't remember. You'll hear that a lot. I can't remember.
Well, for me, it's obviously, like you said, Clem Clemson there. I'm thinking, are you referring to Locomotive? Was the band?
Well, Locomotive was slightly pre this period. I knew of Locomotive, and Rudy's in Love and things like that, which were fine. Yeah, it was good stuff. And in fact, I think I've got a single by the Steam Shovel, who are actually Locomotive, but released on the Big Bear label.
Oh yeah.
Which is a Christmas one. Quite good actually. Must dig that out again. But Locomotive, really by then I think Jim had stopped because he was originally the trumpeter and then went on to manage them. And I think by then they were beginning to dissolve into other bands. Again, other people will know the history of those musicians much better than me. I met Norman Haynes a couple of times. Obviously the rest of the band, but they all sort of went into diverging different bands. But by then Jim was concentrating on basically Indian Summer, Tea and Symphony, Hannibal and Earth, I think were his main
Bakerloo Blues line.
Didn't have the Bakerloo from him. Bakerloo have got a Litchfield drummer, you see, John Hinch, so we've got a sort of into them. And to my recollection, I don't think they ever played the Pokey Hole. Pokey Hole only ran for a couple of years, it's still sort of fondly remembered. In fact, one of the members that we had actually still runs a club called the Pokey Hole. He emailed me a few years ago and apologised for nicking the name, and he runs it out in Warwickshire somewhere, I think. It's still called the Pokey Hole, but the real one only ran for a couple of years. We obviously Earth were the big attraction, because they built up a huge following over the times they played there. Jim would give them to me on a Friday night if they weren't playing for 15 quid. And I still made a loss. In fact, one of the first times I met my wife-to-be was at the Pokey Hole.
Yes. He didn't like me though, and I was upset. And I had a 5-shilling bet with my friend that I'd get a date with him, and so I lost it.
So it was a brief affair, but we had some good. I remember.
Well, if we can go back to.
Sorry, I'll wave.
No, generally I will let you as well, because as far as I'm concerned, it's all. It is.
This could be edited.
It is all relevant. But if we go back to the first time that Earth played at the Pokey Hole,
I can't remember the first time.
Can you tell me about that?
No. I remember the impact they made. I can't actually pin down the first time. I know that it was upstairs at a place called the Prince of Wales in Litchfield, which is no longer there.
No, it's got the nightclub.
And they made we used to have lots of other things on, like there'd be silent films. We had a local guy who was a really good barrelhouse pianist called Barrelhouse Harry, and it was only for fun. He never worked professionally, but he'd do the sort of barrelhouse while we got Tom and Jerry on, flashed onto the wall, and that sort of thing. It was just a fun club really for ourselves. Never did make any money, but I do remember Sabbath making an impact at the pub, because the landlord came down and did ask us to turn it down just a little, because his glasses were actually coming off the shelves downstairs. We were an upstairs room. Then we, probably because of the noise, we had to move to another pub, which was the Robin Hood. No?
Yes.
Yes, the Robin Hood, which is now old people's flats, which is very appropriate. We played in the back room there. That was the first time that Earth played for us as Black Sabbath. When we moved there, they'd just come back from
Hamburg.
Yes, because they'd been touring, came back with a new name, and we must have been close to one of the first gigs they played back here, and as Black Sabbath, because they actually announced it. They'd been advertised as Earth, and they actually announced it from the stage that they're now Black Sabbath, and went into what became their repertoire, their early Black Sabbath repertoire. And the only thing I can remember from that is Tony doing his obligatory 25-minute guitar solo with Terry Gallagher, one of the partners, actually wrapped around his neck and holding a pint. Played the whole 25 minutes, which was a feat of endurance for both of them. Terry usually needed to go to the loo more often than that. Eventually we had to move from there again because of noise problems. And went to a third pub, which is also closed down and is now Curry's, I think. But again, because of the noise, we had to sort of stick mainly to solo blues artists.
So we got that one gig, Earth gig from I think that would have probably been about August or something, 1968. And what was that was after they'd come back from Hamburg. But can you talk about more about the mode of the material? You know, the why it was so loud, perhaps. And maybe a bit of the audience response as well.
Yeah.
Try and take the listener.
I don't know, it's difficult. I mean, we had other bands. We had Jim's other bands, Indian Summer. I can't think Hannibal ever played there. Tea and Symphony did, and they went down like a lead balloon, really, because they were so weird. But we had other heavy bands there who played just as loud, but Sabbath just, they just blew the place apart. And I think it was probably the audience reaction as well, the noise the audience made as much as anything. That the little old ladies in the bar trying to sip their milk stout were sort of pouring it into their ear by mistake with all the noise. But we had quite a people as well. I remember Medicine Head, who were later to go on and have a chart topper, I think, with What I Want Is Wrong. They just turned up on the doorstep. They were based in Stafford at the time, and asked if they could play. That was on the same bill as Sabbath, and they actually tore the place apart as well. That must have been the noisiest night in Litchfield's history, probably since the Civil War. They didn't ask for any money. Sabbath won 15 quid, and we still made a lot. So things, have changed slightly, but I'm still making a lot.
Okay, that was great. Can you tell us a bit more about coming over to Birmingham? And should we try and do Henry's now?
Never heard of it.
Paint a picture of
surprisingly
Henry's.
enough, I didn't go to Henry's that often, which is going to disappoint you slightly.
Well,
it was the trips to Birmingham were usually concerts, the all-nighters at the town hall, which we tried to get. Henry's, I think it was a Tuesday. And for those of us that had to work, which I'm afraid we did, it was a bit difficult, especially if we hadn't got reliable transport. So I didn't get to Henry's in the very early days too often. Eventually, I got fed up of the 9 to 5 stuff, and Jim said, "Well, why don't you come and try working for me for a little while?" Again, I'm not sure of the year. It'd be fairly early, maybe 69, 70.
Well, I've got the opening of Henry's as September '68.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it'd be later than that. By this time, Sabbath had just about left Jim. They were in the process of leaving him. I'd started running a little agency of my own in Lichfield, which we called Tramp. We nicked the name off the band Tramp, which was one of the best British blues bands as ever has been, I think. I confessed that we nicked the name to Bob Hall, the pianist, just a few weeks ago at a local club, and he was okay about it. But they got people like Dave Kelly, Joanne Kelly. We tried running our little agency from Lichfield with a reasonable amount of success. I was trying to work on the blues side of things, really. But where we would tie in was then, if Jim had got anybody coming to Henry's or working for him, or his bands were in any particular area, if I could fill in a date for them with somebody I knew, then we'd work that way. It wasn't always very successful, but that's what we tried to do. I represented one or two bands of my own. I looked after Champion Jack Dupree, the blues blues pianist, for quite a while in this country. Lots of little bands, and Judas Priest, who then hadn't got anything like the same lineup as they had now. But
so your agency was representing Judas Priest at live bookings or management?
This was initially an agency deal. The manager was a guy called Dave Cork.
Yeah.
Who we crossed paths many times after that. And he was pretty good, actually, Dave. He lived and breathed Judas Priest. This is before they became anything like the unit they are now. But we struggled along for a little while, just run from a flat in Lichfield.
Yeah. And
it was quite interesting.
So did Tramp come before you were working for Jim?
Yes.
Or right, okay.
Yeah. So then I got the opportunity to go and work with Jim for a while. I was still very friendly with Sabbath. Obviously, we'd struck up quite a friendship during the Pokey Hole days, with Tony in particular. So I used to sort of truck around and get as many of their dates in as I could. Even sort of going in the van all the way up to Whitehaven and did Glasgow once with them, which was an eye-opener. First time I've ever seen bottles thrown. Well, that's because they were enjoying it so much. So I did as many dates as Sabbath were obviously taking off in the background while all this was going on, and I was playing around at stuff. Sabbath were just growing and growing.
Yeah.
So I'd stayed friends with them, and in fact did when I went to work for Jim. Jim by this time had fallen out with them, and well, they'd taken the opportunity to go to London. This is what we were talking about earlier, with the whole business really being London centric. It was the thing to do. So I actually went to work for Big Bear after Sabbath had left.
Right,
but
which I've got as about September 1970 or so, around about the time that the Paranoid album was released.
Yeah, so I'd be sort of going to Big Bear after that.
Yeah.
But still in touch with the band, which was a slightly ambiguous position, but it was just the way it was. I worked for Jim for, I suppose, a couple of years maybe. Mainly working on people like Brewers Droop, who were a rather entertaining band fronted by Ron Watts, who was at the time, I think he was chairman of the National Blues Federation, and rather larger than life. He also had bands like Sundance. TN Symphony was still working at that stage, although they were a little difficult to move.
Yeah. Can I just bring it back to back to Henry's specifically, and sort of like a night out at Henry's? Tell me about a night out at Henry's, perhaps from leaving Lichfield, or perhaps even from finding out who was going to be playing and making the decision to go, and then leaving Lichfield, getting to Birmingham, and how would you have known who was playing at Henry's? Would it be because you were in constant contact with Jim, or would you see it in the paper or on a poster the last time you were there? Or?
No, it would probably be talking to Jim, or maybe even to the bay. If Sabbath were playing there, they'd have told me. So I saw Sabbath there a couple of times, but in particular, if you got any American blues artists coming over, that was my field. So that's when I'd make the effort to get across there. As I say, the early days, I remember seeing quite a cross-section of bands there, but for God's sake, don't ask me what they were.
I have a list to remind you.
Okay.
He has come prepared.
I've collected together from conversations with people such as yourself and various other sources. I've collected together my little list. I know that some of the names are written incorrectly, but maybe that will just refresh some memories for you. Down here.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I was just looking at Rob Halford bit at the top. He played for me in a band called... I'll tell you later. Yes, I saw Arthur Crudup. I saw Dr. Ross. Lightning Slim was actually... I was involved in the tour where we were booking him out. Wonderful man. In fact, I've still got his umbrella. But I think a lot of people have got Lightning Slim's umbrellas. He used to like to buy them and give them away. Never saw Status Quo there. JB Hutto, yeah. Thin Lizzy, I saw a couple of times there. Dustin Bennett, Bakerloo. I've seen most of these. Flying Hat Band, obviously, because they were sort of one of my bands from my little agency. Never saw the Dogwood Bit People there. That was... I think one of the spin-offs from Locomotive, but I never actually saw the band playing there. Champion Jack, obviously. Steve Rye, actually, Steve Rye and Simon Prager played on their own and with Reverend Gary Davis, and I've got quite a few photographs of that, which may be of interest to you. Steve Rye I knew from when he was the harmonica player with the Groundhogs. Brewers Droop, of course. Don't know about the Shuffling Hungarians, I can't actually remember that. But, JB Hutto. Trying to think.
So hopefully that's kind of... I'm quite pleased with the strike rate there.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah. So now can you
go
back to that sort of arriving on Hill Street, Station Street?
Yeah. It'd probably be by train. In those days, I would think, which is obviously straight out of the station and straight onto Hill Street. Henry's was a big old-fashioned looking pub that looked a little bit daunting from the outside to the youngster, especially when you saw the sort of raincoated men going in and sort of shuffling around with the pints and what have you. But when you went upstairs, it was totally different. It was still shabby, but the room. I don't know. It's difficult. It was just Henry's. It was a longish rectangular room, as I remember, with the stage down at the far end from your door. Jim at his little table collecting money for all he was worth, and it was basic. I think is probably the way to do it. I think I remember there was sort of brick wallpaper on the end behind the stage, a few posters up there, and forthcoming gigs and that sort of thing. Basically, you just sort of shuffled in and shuffled around and had a drink if you could afford it, and just waiting for the band. The bands, I think there was a little sort of area outside where the bands used to sort of congregate at the top of the stairs, but again that might be one of the 2,000 or 3,000 other similar clubs that I'm remembering. The sound was loud. The bluesmen actually were okay. They could cope with it. Some of the noisier bands, I know Thin Lizzy had trouble with the sound once or twice. I think I saw them there twice. Yeah, you surprised me. I actually went more than I thought. But no, I mean, it was just a basic pub room with a little stage at one end. I don't know what it did the rest of the week, but probably bingo.
Okay, I've got. If I can just relay some more stuff I've picked up about it, and then maybe that'll.
You probably know far more about it than I do.
On the old adverts that I've seen from the Birmingham Mail, it says Postermania in there. I don't know what that means exactly.
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
No, okay. Jim's told me about there was a film room, which I found interesting because you were mentioning that earlier. If you just let me go through this list, and then we'll come back to some of them. Somebody else has told me that there was netting on the ceiling to as an atmospheric thing.
Yeah, it's possible. Don't immediately recall it. But,
right. And I wondered if you could talk about the playlist. What records were being played on there as well. So if we go back to that, just anything more that you can give me, really.
The short answer is no, not really. Jim was probably responsible for the records that were played. Obviously, his club. He got a record collection that even then that you just cannot believe. Amazing record collection. He perhaps had a little bit of difficulty because his first love was jazz, and I think most of the record collection was jazz. But almost certainly he used to review. Again, this might be later, but he used to review records. And I know he had a lot sent to him, so that was more than likely where the records came from. But I was just a kid. I just went there for the music. Get the band on. Where's the band? Give us the band.
Right. Okay, and of course, round the corner was Alex's. So
yes.
So let's go back to that night out at Henry's, Duster Bennett at Henry's, and then on to Alex's.
Well, I can't help you. Oh, Duster Bennett. He was he was such a nice guy. Such a nice guy. He'd done work for me when I ran an agency for the second time. I think he'd done work for me a couple of days before he was killed, and that was just such a shock. Especially as he was killed probably about 3 miles from where we live.
That's right, yeah.
On the A5. But I'm digressing again. The trip to Alex's, I used to go there quite a lot with Tony Iommi when we were out and about, when we met up or when Sabbath had been playing, maybe gone for an Indian or something. It was usually sort of early hours, and it was amazing who was there. Tony again knew a lot more people than I ever did. I just sort of stood on the edge, and if I spotted a famous face, I'd sort of think, "Ooh, yeah." But that was about it. But yeah, it was a well-known meeting up place. Thing is that when on a Henry's night, that wasn't usually possible. Not unless I got in my own car, which is very, very rare, or you'd be getting the train back. There'd be no sort of hanging about and going around to Alex's. But later on, and we went along.
Okay, that was really good. But what I'd like to do is just go back over it, and if you listen to the radio, you'll notice that it's very sometimes on certain kinds of radio programs. It's very rare. You rarely hear the presenter's voice. What you hear is the interviewee.
Yeah.
They start off by explaining what they're going to say, and it's almost as if they've been asked a question, but they're repeating the question in the first part of what they're saying.
Yeah.
So if I was to ask you, tell me about Alex's pie stand.
Alex's pie stand.
Yeah, you would start off like that. You would say, Alex's pie stand was a place just round the corner from Henry's Blues House where we used to go, kind of thing like that. And it'd be really good to go through one of those 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night stories, standing next to Tony. Yeah.
Well, it's as I say, that was probably a little bit later on, but okay. So what do you want me to do?
Just I'll say the question,
okay.
And you start off by repeating the question, but give me a little gap between me finishing speaking and you starting speaking, because that will make my job in editing so much easier. Okay, so Norman, can you tell me a bit about Alex's pie stand?
Well, Alex's pie stand was a very famous Birmingham monument that was just around the corner from Henry's. It was a very basic, as I remember, little stall. Its main attribute being that it just never seemed to be shut. We used to occasionally go around there if I'd got a lift back to Lichfield from Henry's, and we'd pop round and sort of socialise with people that had been to the gig, or later on other musicians would turn up there. It was a renowned meeting place later on in the evenings after bands had finished playing. And when I was on the odd occasion I was knocking around with Tony in Lichfield, we'd perhaps go to a gig, or they'd been to a gig, and we'd sort of meet up there, park up, and just see who was around. Quite a lot of other bands used to use it as just a winding down place, much the same way, I suppose, as Watford Services was for bands touring further afield. It was just a convenient place to meet up. Pies were wonderful as well.
That's great. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I don't know if
you can't see you smiling on there.
No, I know.
I don't know if you had anything to add about. Did you go to Henry?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay.
I was a little bit.
Right, we'll leave that there. Okay. Can you tell me more about your involvement with Judas Priest, then? So how they came to be on the Tramp agency, and perhaps some early live experiences with Judas Priest as well. Now I'm kind of Sabbath is my specialist subject. Priest is definitely very much secondary. I know a bit about Al Atkins. I know a bit about how they were sort of limping along really during the first part of the 70s, 69, 70, 71, 72. So you really will be telling me a lot of new stuff about Judas Priest there. What you know about them and your involvement with Dave Cork and so on.
Best glossed over. Well, Judas Priest were basically a Walsall band, I believe, who had been gigging around for quite a few years before they came to my attention, mainly because on the strength of a really good name, I think. Their manager, in inverted commas, was a guy called Dave Cork, who in another life would be running a gang of robber children in Dickensian London. He was an out-and-out rogue, most of the time quite lovable, and he absolutely thought the world of Judas Priest. So when I started getting a few bookings for them as part of the Tramp agency, then automatically Dave came with them, and before long he was practically a partner, I would think. he definitely thought he was running the place anyway. The band was not really recognisable as the unit it is today, but the component parts, Al Atkins was originally, I suppose, the leader of the band. They got a big, I think Chris was the name of the drummer, big chap who was a real powerhouse. But they weren't getting anywhere. They were limping along. They were in need of a spark, really. They had a certain amount of that when they changed the singer. Al eventually, I think, got fed up. I know we had a few words about how things were going. He says in his book that I sacked him. I'm sure I didn't. I'm much too nice to sack anybody, but I think we decided to part company. Another local band called Athens Wood had got a singer called Rob Halford, who really fitted the bill, and I think that's when they started to really start putting a decent act together. But to be perfectly honest, at that time I was looking after a band of Tony's called Necromandus, who were a heavy rock band that he knew from his Whitehaven and Cumbrian days when he used to spend a lot of time up there. And Judas Priest and me were very much a second fiddle band. And that meant that Dave Cook pretty well had a free hand in running them. I was never a huge fan, to be honest. We used them a couple of times at concerts that we did. I remember we put Family on at the Mayfair, the Hippodrome, beg your pardon, and used Judas as a support then. And there is a cassette recording of that in existence. And they were pretty average. I think the thing that really sparked them was obviously Glenn Tipton joining. Now the Flying Hat Band were another band that I used to work a lot. Glenn was obviously the main man there, and it seemed logical eventually that the two would amalgamate. In fact, I contributed to my own downfall in losing a band there, because I remember driving Glenn down to I think it was Track Studios in London to do his first work with Priest, which is when I met Keith Moon as well, but that's another story entirely. So Judas Priest were on the books, and when Tony and I decided to form an agency together, which was a little later on from this, then they were one of the bands we signed to the agency. But they still owe me quite a lot from that contract, if you'd like to mention that to them.
Okay, right, yeah.
How are you going to edit out the waffle?
Well, I don't know if you've looked at the Home of Metal website, but a lot of the clips are literally a minute or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, so and obviously I don't know how many of these clips I will want to put up. Or the ideal thing is if we have an object, you talking about the object.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. So that's why I was going to maybe wind it up now and start having a look at some of the objects that you've got. If that's okay.
Can I interest you both in a sandwich?
I ate before I came. I'd love another cup of tea.
Another cup of tea?
Yeah.
You don't want a sandwich?
I'm fine.
Biscuit or something?
Biscuit with a cup of tea?
I'd love a biscuit
Yeah,
with tea.
okay,
Okay, that's great. Yeah, well, shall we have a break now?
Yes.
Because that has been absolutely superb, Norman. Thank you very much.